some of you may have seen, years and years ago, this B movie about a guy who has a big ranch in Mexico, and one of the campesinos comes rushing back from having encountered a brontosaur in the forest, and he can only point inarticulately at the woods and say, something, 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 something. And that's what I am. I'm a monkey. And I've come back to the truth. And I'm telling you, there's something over the next hill that is off the scale. Off the scale. And I have made it my business to, delve. I'm a delver. I'm a noetic archaeologist. There the obscure heresies and strange rites and all of this stuff. Been there, done that. It's all pale soup compared to this. And so I hype it to you simply to try and inspire you to explore it. We are at the present state in the position of explorers of the New World 50 years after Columbus. We have notebook entries. We have partial maps, but we don't have a complete map of what this thing is. It's another dimension. It is literally another dimension. I took DMT to a lama of great accomplishment, not one of the grab-ass can of Budweiser welded to the good right hand lamas, but a real lama. This guy was over 90 when he smoked DMT, and since his wheel has turned. And he said to me, it's the lesser lights. He said, you can't go further into the bardo and return. And so I think that we stand at the brink of an enormous frontier. Call it incorporeality, call it non-material existence, or, bite the bullet, call it death. But this is the frontier that we stand on the edge of. This is what history has been about. History has been some kind of suicide plot for 15,000 years. Not a moment passed that the plot was not advanced closer and closer and closer and closer to completion. And now in the 20th century, we see that this thing, this transcendental object at the end of time, this attractor that chose us out of the animal kingdom and sculpted the neocortex, opposed the thumb, stood us on our hind legs, gave us binocular vision. This thing is calling us toward itself across eons of cosmic time. We are asked to mirror it, and as we mirror it, we become more of its essence. And as we become more of its essence, we leave behind the animal organization that we were cast in the beginning. And what this is about, who knows? Is this a drama of cosmic redemption? Is it the transcendental other at the end of time? Is it a Gnostic demon? Is it Ildabuath? What is it? We do not know. But I really believe we are in the era when we will come to know. And what the psychedelics are periscopes in the temporal dimension. If you want to see a little bit into the future, elevate your psychedelic periscope outside of the three-dimensional continuum and peer around. For thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, we have been pulled toward this omega point. The earth is like an egg. It has come to its moment of fructification. The dawn that has been anticipated since we were herding our cattle across the plains of Africa is now upon us. The east is streaked with the blush of rosy dawn. It is coming upon us. And I think that it will redeem history, that history is not a nightmare. It is a passage. It is an initiation. Think of the fetus in the womb at the moment of transition. Surely it must despair. The walls are closing in. It's being crushed and strangled. Gone are the endless amniotic oceans of a few months before, the weightlessness, the effortless delivery of food through the umbilical cord. Suddenly, it's just boundaries and agony and crushing pressure. That's where we are. And we are going to have to shed history like a snake sheds its skin if we want to slip off into hyperspace, where I think all of magical humanity is awaiting us and cheering us on, lending their weight. They're all out there, Proclus and Plotinus and Plato and Hypatia and Henry Cornelius Agrippa and John Dee and Robert Flood and Eliphas Levi. They're all out there pulling for us. And every shaman and shamaness, every magician, practitioner, as far back in time as you go, was part of the plan, the conjuration, the great work, the distillation of the quintessence. History is a magical invocation. And at the end of that invocation, if it is correctly done, all boundaries will dissolve into the stone, the lapis, a transdimensional vehicle that can move through space and time, that is the collectivity of all human souls, free at last in what William Blake called the divine imagination. And you don't have to wait for the general dispensation. You can join up anytime by hyperspatializing your metaphors and your point of view through psychedelic symbiosis with the plants that are pouring this hyperdimensional Gaian vision into the minds of anyone who will detoxify themselves from history and linear thinking, and but open themselves to the presence of the transformative mystery that is going to leave this planet unrecognizable to us within our lifetimes. So that's the basic spiel. And I think it raises a lot of questions, and yours is first. The answer is yes, yes. The question is, are there herbs in the temperate zone that contain DMT? And yes, there are certain grasses, Phalaris arundinacea, Phalaris tuberosa. These can be ordered from plant dealers or gotten, ironically enough, from agricultural experiment stations, because these are pasturage grasses. A lot of people are doing wonderful work right now, learning how to make DMT preparations out of native plants. The mature Phalaris grass, it's very diffuse, the DMT. So what people are doing is they're getting the seeds and they're sprouting them in a sprouter. And then they're taking the sprouted seeds and air drying them. Well, you can imagine how powdery sprouts become if you air dry them. Well, then you can powder up a handful of these sprouts and twist that into a bomber and come very, very close to the flash point. The other thing, since I'm talking to recipe-oriented magicians, the other thing you need to understand if you want to work in this area is that the DMT can ordinarily not be taken orally, because there is an enzyme system in your intestines called the monoamine oxidase system, then it will destroy the DMT. But the good news is there are certain compounds called monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Didn't you know it? If you take a monoamine oxidase inhibitor and then you take DMT, the DMT will survive the gut and pass into the bloodstream and pass the blood-brain barrier. So here is a very important piece of practical information I'm about to give you. If you want to inhibit your monoamine oxidase in order to make DMT trips longer or mushroom trips longer and more intense, or to activate DMT if you only have a little bit of it, then what you should get are the seeds of Pergamum harmala, Pergamum, Pergamum harmala, Harmala. You can either order it under that name from seed dealers or go to an Iranian market and buy what is called Hurmal, Hurmal. This is simply Pergamum harmala seeds. They use it as an incense to fumigate rooms. But 2 grams, don't take more. 2 grams of this, macerated in a mortar and pestle with spring water taken from a spring at the new moon near a crossroads, will inhibit your MAO. It will inhibit your MAO. Consequently, then when you smoke the bomber of Phalaris dust, it will grab on. Or you can even smoke mushrooms then, and they will grab on. So knowing how to inhibit MAO is one of the key techniques in this kind of herbal shamanic magic. Other plants that contain DMT, and here's one you all should be aware of because it's probably right around here, is Desmanthus illinoisensis, Illinois bundleweed. It's a rank weed. I've not seen it except in the dried form, but people have grown hundreds of pounds of this stuff in a few months, and the root bark has the highest concentration of DMT ever measured in any plant. It's higher than the ayahuasca admixtures used in the Amazon. Pardon? In the root bark, which you dry the root and then scrape the bark off, and you'll get this reddish root bark. The red is actually the DMT. Varroa trees in the Amazon shed DMT in their sap, and it's always a blood red sap. And to show you how strong it is, the Indians in the Amazon, some of the tribes, they roll their arrow points directly into that sap, and it's a paralytic poison in the bloodstream of monkeys and small animals. So there is a great deal of work is being done right now, and you should, if you're of an experimental and herbal and alchemical and magical bent, people are creating what they call ayahuasca analogs. This is where you use local plants to create a brew which is chemically equivalent to an Amazonian hallucinogen. And of course, you have the satisfaction that it's yours. It's your magical recipe. No one on earth is doing quite what you've got. And it's a lot of interesting work is being done. And you'll hear more about this. In fact, Jonathan Ott just wrote a book called Ayahuasca Analogs, in which the state of the art is spelled out, and it would be worth your while to check that out if you're an experimentalist. Yeah. The question is there a simple reagent test for the presence of DMT? The answer is sort of. You can do a paper chromatographic test, and all you need is a little UV light and some chromatography paper and some solvent dishes, mean, it's at the level of a seventh grade science project. Yes, I don't know how much I should say on this subject. I'm probably about to say too much. But at one gathering I go to, one of the people who's a very regular part of that particular posse is a wheat breeder. So when he heard about the phalaris, he was a geneticist and a wheat breeder, and he has been working very quietly on his own to produce super strains of phalaris. And I think we will soon see super strains because the underground community is incredibly creative in this area. The compound I talked about yesterday, Salvia divinorum, that's all underground work. Brett Blosser, the anthropologist who discovered it, is a complete freak. The chemist who extracted it, who would prefer I don't put out his name, is a complete freak. And the people who then did the confirmation studies, my brother and his band of performing pharmacologists, all freaks. So we do not take ourselves seriously enough. I mean, we have our scientists, we have our philosophers, we have our thinkers, our legal experts. We are a complete community. And it's no longer, in my mind, even necessary to publish in straight journals and to seek a pat on the head from, the American pharmacology community. They don't understand what these things are for anyway. Yeah. Yes, I'll repeat this and strengthen once again my case to the guy who owns the company that he should pay me, for God's sake. If you want a catalog of extremely rare and useful psychoactive and magical plants, probably the most complete in the world, the company is called Of the Jungle. P.O. Box 1801, Sebastopol, Sebastopol, California, 95472. Write and ask for a catalog and tell them George Bush sent you. No, I'm teasing. Don't tell them that. They won't send you the catalog. Well, I didn't mean to diss Castaneda as a metaphor maker. No, I think the Teachings of Don Juan is a tremendous book. I'm very suspicious of some of his later stuff. It's interesting what you said, because the famous crow transformation in the Teachings of Don Juan has been traced, and I'm sure many of you know this book, has been traced to George MacDonald's book, Through the Gates of the Silver Key. And George MacDonald was a friend of Evans Vance. So I think what we're getting here is a mining of late 19th century English folklore by Castaneda. Nevertheless, the presence of these small entities has been a part of folklore for a long, long time. Elementals, tykes. What puzzles me, I guess, is I've spent a lot of time in this magical literature and art historical area, and the descriptions don't quite match. I can't quite convince myself that the sprites, the afrits, the nixies, the jinns, that these creatures of the woodland fae are the same thing. Or I don't know whether I am contaminated by an early love of science fiction and well, again, close but no banana. All these popular aliens that are running around, the Whitley Streboids and all these things, are much more mundane than what I encountered. I mean, what I encountered was terrifyingly not human. terrifyingly alien. And I just do not quite get. And Madame Blavatsky was into it, and they're always saying, I don't know, they're very sort of cut and dried about it. And when I encounter an extraterrestrial alien or a creature from another dimension, the main thing that's happening for me is the implications are blowing my mind. They seem totally immune to the implications. Yeah. Well, a sufficient amount of DMT is smoked west of the Pacific Coast Highway that it wouldn't surprise me if the writers of Star Trek, were onto this. Yes, what is not much talked about, the part of the experience which is anomalous, and maybe people who know more about magical literature than I do can correct me, but what the elves are really interested in is this stuff which I call visible language. That's the whole point of the encounter, is to exhibit it and to get you to do it. Well, now, first of all, think for a minute about ordinary language. It's really weird. It's the weirdest thing we do. If you were looking for the thumbprint of God on creation, human language would be a good candidate. Because look, we're supposed to be some kind of animal who just went a little further than the next guy. But to get out of that Shakespeare and Milton is a pretty amazing accomplishment, hardly to speak of the mathematical languages that we generate. So something happened. Some people think only 35,000 years ago. Imagine if that's true. I don't care. Some people say 150,000 years ago. But to speak, to take small mouth noises and to turn them into signifiers for symbols and relationships, in spite of some people's enthusiasm for cetaceans and dolphins, I just am not overwhelmed by the evidence. To me, it is a miracle to be able to speak poetry. It is a miracle. When Coleridge wrote, "And south and south and southward we fled, and it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high went floating by as green as emerald." That's language. And it's magic. And we have a fascination, then we also paint. Then we sculpt. Then we write. Then we create electronic databases. Then film, television. Clearly, what we want to do is we want to communicate visually. And these things are saying there's a way to do it. Do it. And I don't understand. Do we all have to be loaded on DMT all the time? Can you learn to do this? The gentleman who asked about dreams, here's a piece of information that is critical in this jigsaw puzzle. If you have smoked DMT at any time in the past, it is possible to have a dream in which people are running around and you're checked into the Mars hotel and the luggage is lost and this and that. And in the middle of all that, someone drags out a little glass pipe and hands it to you. It will happen. It will happen in the dream. Not a memory, not a simulacrum. It will really happen. Well, now, to me, that's an amazing piece of data because what it's saying is you can do it on the natch. You may have to be dead asleep, but still, on the natch, this can be done. And the lucid dreamers, the biofeedback people, the people who claim these wonderful things that you can do with sleep and dream and programming, I challenge them. Teach people to have DMT dreams in their sleep. And then let's figure out how to drag that puppy into the light so that we can do it at will on the natch. Just 1 second. And one thing that I have come to believe is that we remember no more than 5% of our dreams. And it's the most mundane 5%. I think, and there's scientific evidence to support this. Remember I said DMT is in the human brain? Well, it concentrates in the human cerebrospinal fluid on a 24-hour cycle, and it reaches its peak of concentration between 3 and 4 a.m. in most people. That's when the deep REM sleep is happening. When you give somebody DMT, they lay back, they close their eyes, and the way you, the guide, the sitter, I don't like the word guide, you, the sitter, the way you can tell that they're getting off is their eyes dart wildly behind their closed eyelids. It means they're in REM. They're in REM sleep. They've been immediately shoved into deep dreaming. So I believe that what DMT is doing in normal human metabolism is it mediates the descent, the spiral descent into dream, and that every single night we are reunited with the boundaryless oceanic mystery of being that we are so frantic about in waking life and so distant from. And that if we could, in fact, just engineer a drug that would allow us to remain fully conscious as we drift deeper into dream, we would need no other drug or substance. That's where we want to go. And I think that's where history is headed. What the Archaic Revival is about is a revivification of the Aboriginal dream time. We are going to live in the imagination. We are preparing to decamp from three-dimensional space. I mean, yes, the earth is the cradle of the human race, but you don't stay in the cradle forever, you know. And it's something like going into dream. It's something like taking the hyper-technical virtual reality internet head of the snake and inserting the shamanic, late Paleolithic, ecstatic, orgiastic tail of the snake, and then you have the Ouroboros completion. Then you have the quintessence, and the work is complete, and history ends, and we live then in the light of